Good morning. Good morning and welcome to this real wintry morning. Our service today will explore how our core values shape and guide our lives. In her book, The Way of Integrity, Martha Beck suggests that integrity, which I define as a matching of our core values with how we live, is a path to the true self. I can imagine that all of us have had times in our lives when there's a real mismatch of our deepest values and how we live. And probably we have all suffered from that mismatch at times. Our hope today is that you will hear from several people from the congregation about their lived experiences with the process of matching up core values and actions. Hopefully you too might then look for ways to let your core values guide your living. Welcome to this place of peace. Welcome to a place that embraces you in love, just the way you are. We are blessed by your presence today because this congregation is nothing without all of us. So thank you for being here, and thank you for those of you who are streaming. Are there guests today that are willing to stand and introduce yourselves? Oh, thank you.
Hi, my name is Erin Slomers, and I just moved to the area in November, but thank you for having me here today.
Oh, welcome. We're so glad you're here. Welcome. Thank you.
Hey everybody, my name is Susan Kramer. This is my partner Chris Heimbach. Mary is a good dear friend of ours, and we are recovering Catholics. And thanks for being so welcoming.
Welcome both. Any others?
Kay
Oh,
Harris,
thank you.
and I have lived here most of my life and just moved back to the area. So I'm very happy to be here.
Oh, and we're happy you're here. Thank you. Thank you. For those of you who are new, if you'd like to choose a yellow mug at coffee time, we might then identify you as a new person to get to know more. And as a community, we share our joys and concerns, sometimes by writing in the book here, and sometimes just by lighting a candle. Those joys and concerns you share in the book will be read later in the service. Collectively, Unitarian Universalists hold our now 8 principles as core values. And many of us hold deep faith that these core values are desperately needed in our wider world. Imagine this world guided by the 8 principles, or even the 7 grandfathers' teachings of the original people here. Imagine the peaceful connections among all living things on this planet. Maybe we should take up UU evangelism. Our prelude this morning, it's played by our beloved Barbara Young, and it's by Bach.
Whoever you are and wherever you are in life's journey, you are welcome here with us this morning. I'm Reverend Alex. I use he and him pronouns. I'm the minister and resident millennial here at UUCGT. And I welcome you to this service as we explore our deepest values. A special welcome to those of you joining us for the first time and all of you that are still kind of coming to get to know this community. The journey of life can often be a hard one, and we hope that no matter who you are or however you've come to us this morning, no matter how you identify or even who you love, that you'll find a place for yourself here with us. Welcome to our table. We welcome you to pull up a chair and stay a while. As we settle in this morning, I invite you to hear these words from the friend, writer, and educator, Parker Palmer. A few of you may know Parker Palmer. This is a quote from his book, Let Your Life Speak. There are moments when it is clear, if I have eyes to see, that the life I am living is not the same as the life that wants to live in me. Before you tell your life what you intend to do with it, listen for what it intends to do with you. Before you tell your life what truths and values you have decided to live up to, let your life tell you what truths that you embody, what values you represent. So, dear ones, in this hour, may our lives speak. May we also be courageous enough to listen. And into this deep listening, I invite us to come, let us worship together this morning. We've come now to the time in our service to light the chalice. This is a beacon of hope and a symbol of the faith that we have in each and every person. I will read our chalice lighting words as Mary so graciously lights our chalice this morning. We try to practice, a couple times. We light the chalice this morning, reminding us of the deep values that we share. May the light of this flame bring clarity of purpose, an ease of suffering, and the embracing of our shared values that guide us as we work to make this world better. And now, let us sound our Buddhist singing bowl as we center and enter into this time of rest and rejuvenation. May you please now rise in body or in spirit as we join in singing our opening hymn, number 1051 in the Teal hymnal. For those of you following along with the screen, we have all the words right up here. You may recognize it. And we're graciously led by Renee Russell, our music director this morning.
For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. We are our grandmother's breast, and we are our grandfather's
now be hearing the first of our 4 reflections for you today from congregants in our community. And so we will welcome Mike Jackson to come forward to offer his reflection.
Thank you, Alex. I grew up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, the northeast side, in the 1940s and 1950s, in an all-white, middle-class neighborhood. In 1950, a black family moved in the neighborhood with no fanfare, nothing. And it was just one of the people that lived in the neighborhood. They had a son, his name was Roger, that was older than I was. He was my brother's age. He came over to the house, we played together, we were just good friends and one of the people. Roger, I'm not sure how he felt, but he seemed to be very fine with getting along with all of us. Roger Wilkins went on to be the first black student president of the law school at the University of Michigan and later became quite a civil rights advocate in Washington, D.C. After graduation, I went to the University of Michigan myself, and while there, I became the announcer for the basketball team. In doing that, I got to meet all the players, would go into the locker room and learn more about them, and so I could talk in the intermission and things about them. We became good friends, and again, we were just one of the people, one of the guys. We were great friends. We all got along fine. There was no hint of anything different between any of us, just good people. Well, after graduation, I went into the Air Force, and after some initial training, in 1959, I was sent to Moody Air Force Base in Valdosta, Georgia. I'd never been in the South before, except Florida, which is south, of course, but I went for my initial training at Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida, and then spent some time in spring breaks in Florida. But I never lived in Georgia. At Moody Air Force Base, I'd met a fellow, Jim Smith was his name, a captain. Jim had flown combat missions in Korea, seasoned pilot. Became a good friend. He was black. One night I said to Jim, let's go into Valdosta and go to the movie. He said, fine, great, let's go. So we drove in, parked the car. I'll get the tickets, I said. I walked up to the ticket booth and I said, I'd like 2 tickets for tonight's movie. Well, you can come in, but that N, and he used the word we all detest, cannot come in with you. Neither can I said. We went back to the base. On the way back, Jim said to me, that's okay, Mike. I said, no, Jim, it isn't. Later at my stay at Moody, I met a girl in the BX, and I said, would you like to go out? She said, sure. So I said, well, I'll pick you up Saturday afternoon. I went over to her house, and her father was watching a basketball game. I walked in, he said, you like basketball? I said, yes, I was the announcer for the Michigan basketball. He said, Michigan. He said, that they let those, again using the N-word, players play with the white folks on the same team? It should be noted that it was not until 1969 that black players were allowed to play at the University of Georgia. So we went out, had a good time, came back that night. I said to her, I can't remember her name. She did not share her father's feelings, but I said to her, talk to your dad. Things will change. But they haven't. Thank you.
As we speak of values, we use the offering to demonstrate the value of generosity to this congregation and to our wider community. The baskets have 2 sides, one for meeting the needs of the congregation and the other for helping meet the needs of those in the wider community. For those of you who are streaming, you may give in the 3 ways noticed on the screen. Please know that your contributions are utilized with great care. We have committees that decide everything about how your contributions are used. So know that they are so, so appreciated. Thank you.
We'll now have our second reflection from Holly Haywood.
When Alex first asked me if I'd like to speak in this service, I didn't say yes right away because I wasn't sure if I could narrow down one value in time. But since I had him on the phone, I wanted to share with him a magical synchronicity I had been meaning to email him about. A few Sundays back, my 6-year-old son and I were on our way to church, and he piped up from the back with the question, "Why do we go to church?" I loved that question, and I loved contemplating it, but it was harder to describe than I would have thought. I muddled around trying to explain that it was a chance to get to learn things we want to learn more about, to be reminded of what's important to us, to learn more about ourselves and others, to be ourselves, learn to love ourselves and others, learn to give of ourselves, and also be challenged and still loved if we make a mistake. I'm not sure how much went in. I probably talked too long, but I did enjoy the thought exercise. Then we get to church, and the theme for the service was Beloved Community in honor of Martin Luther King Jr. And Reverend Alex proceeds to eloquently describe exactly what I was trying to describe to Avon, and also stake the claim that this beloved community is at the core of Unitarian Universalism. That day, my heart swelled with this magic of connection and affirmation that I was in the right place. And I was so glad to be sharing this with Alex in our conversation. I had one other thing to tell Alex while I had him there, too. That had been burning on my heart since I found UUCGT as my home. This was a hope and a dream I have had for this community that pulls from my RLDS roots, now known as Community of Christ. Summer church camp. It was called Reunion. Members from far and wide came to spend a week together learning, bonding, and having fun up at the Park of the Pines in Boyne City. Community came alive in this setting, and we all got to know each other in different ways, from taking your place on KP duty to learning crafts, sports, or Sunday school from various members. There were elders and families of all sizes, longtime members and marginal attendees too. We all mixed together, worked, learned, and played together. I got to know some of the serious adult leaders in different ways, like how goofy they could be at the week's end talent show. The specialness of the nightly campfires at the shore of Lake Charlevoix, which included hilarious skits one could be recruited into and ridiculously funny songs designed to trip your tongue, but concluding and sending us to bed with meditative and connecting songs. As I described this to Alex on the phone, as a wish for UUCGT's future, he wisely noticed a pattern in my comments had a theme that just happened to perfectly align with the topic for the sharing. So yes, community is one of my deeply held values that keeps me coming back to center. And I have found so much community here, from the Soul Matters Magic to Transforming Hearts, and just starting to get to know such wonderful, interesting people. And also I've come to realize that in some ways it's not all sunshine and rainbows, magic and synchronicity, except for that it really is. There's just other ways to get there. And part of that is necessary to be in a little bit of good discomfort. Like asking hard, uncomfortable questions, like, but why didn't the kings choose Unitarian Universalism to launch their base? And finding the answer to that question inside ourselves by opening further. It's also allowing the good discomfort inside myself as I learn to love my anxious, insecure, judgmental parts that feel like they have no idea how to belong, even though it's what they have wanted their whole life, and it just keeps showing up. Yes, I have anxiously been late for church before, pulled over and turned around because I felt too bad about being late, and then turned back around, grabbed my anxiety by the hand, and just came anyway. When I see people showing up, when I see their struggle and they show it, taking the time to talk openly about it, this is a part of the hardness too. It's essential to community. And I want more of this. And more in a concentrated, week-long, nature-filled format. I want to know you all better before we part ways. And I want you all to know me and Avon better too. So while I was writing this, I asked Avon if he remembered asking me that question, why do we go to church? He did. I asked if he remembered my answer. He did not. So, we'll keep coming back to be reminded of why we come, and to start planning UUCGT summer camp, of course.
Now is the time in our service where we set aside time to name and honor the joys and concerns that touch our lives, those moments that we know just need to be shared in community with one another. So I'll be sharing some of those that have been offered up for us to hold on our hearts as we are gathered. If you have a joy or a concern that's a bit too tender to share, you're always welcome to silently light a candle off to the side here if you'd like at any point in our service. You can also reach out to myself or to our congregational care team. Joni here would be happy to represent that team. Or you can simply just hold it on your heart as you are held in the love of this community. None of us is ever meant to travel life's journey alone. And so here is what has been shared as we are gathered this morning. A candle for my sister Jessica Peters, who is having to help a beloved pet pass today. His name is Oodles. And you can't see this, but there's a lovely cat drawing here. So we're going to think of Oodles as Oodles passes and also of Jessica. We also have a concern that's on many of our hearts as we are gathered out of Memphis, Tennessee, that of the death of Tyree Nichols at the hands of police. And so we're holding all of that this morning as well, as we are reminded of those injustices that persist. We also have a joy from Mary Van Valen, a joy that Mary Ann and Kim Greeby serenaded a woman named Monica at Blair Elementary School in honor of her citizenship. She recently just became a U.S. citizen, and they played the Star Spangled Banner for her. And so a big joy that we're sharing this morning. And as we hold all of these things, let us now hold a silence for all of the joys and concerns that remain on our hearts. And as we move now into the spirit of meditation and prayer, will you breathe with me and just allow your breath to go at its own rhythm? Feeling calmness wash over you as you find your center. Feeling the sensations of your breath, the in and out, the rise and fall. Allow yourself to just sink into this stillness together. The journeys of our lives carry so much with them. The times when we are at our best, when our actions align themselves so much with what we believe and who we know that we are. And there are also times when we inevitably fall short. Times of struggle where the road isn't clear, when we miss the mark with who we hope to be, who we imagine we are still yet becoming. In this moment, as our nation reckons with systemic racism in our policing, we see how far away we are from fully living into this country's values. Mourning the loss of Tyree Nichols killed by Memphis police. What we know about our lives is that it is never too late to listen, to find lessons in our many experiences and stories, to notice those eureka or aha moments that sometimes lie right beneath the surface. Sometimes we may even be surprised with what our lives have to teach us about ourselves and what it is that we value. No matter where we are on this path, may our shared values of compassion, of justice and equity, of the free and responsible search, and the value of life's journey always bring us back to our center. Life is a process, an unfurling and unfolding adventure. Though we travel this road, though we may never know where the road is leading, we never journey alone. And to this I say, may it be so, and amen. I will now invite Kat Norman to come forward and offer her reflection.
Good morning. As Alex said, my name is Kat. I'm non-binary, and my pronouns are either she, her, or they, them. I facilitate our Creativity Matters group, And I also coordinate overall logistics for our growing Soul Matters program. Despite years of rich experience with small groups and a deep hunger to connect in the midst of the pandemic, I initially resisted participating in Soul Matters, but not for the reasons that you might think. I was struggling to understand and come to terms with what I now know is visual impairment caused by binocular vision disorder. And if you look at the image on the screen over there, you will get a good idea of how I was viewing the world and how I still view it on my worst days. Everyday activities, from reading to navigating through my environment, had become a battle. And the Soul Matters packets, rich with materials, felt too hard to wade through. Meetings via Zoom brought on horrific headaches and worsened my already distorted vision. A year later, though, I had a diagnosis. I have nifty new prism lenses and other adaptive technologies and coping strategies. And so when Mary announced that she wanted to start a Creativity Matters group that would explore Soul Matters themes via creative journal and monthly creative project prompts, I checked out the sample packet. And something hungry shifted in my soul. Bit by bit, BVD had rendered unreliable not only my perceptions, but my balance and my coordination, completely disrupting my usual pathways to creativity. Even with the new lenses, I couldn't operate my DSLR camera, or reliably navigate sheet music, or spend blocks of concentrated time editing photos or writing. I needed to move beyond my fears and deep mourning for what had been, to forge new paths for creative exploration and expression, and I desperately wanted companions for that journey. And so I opened up my heart and signed up to be trained as a facilitator. And the journey has been amazing. Along the way, I've had a lot of fun exploring, stumbling into slow drawing and paper cutting, to intuitive and meditative practices that help to powerfully ground me and reconnect me to my center. In his opening to this month's Creativity Matters packet, Reverend Scott Taylor highlights an important difference in the ways that creative and artists think about the concept of finding our center. For creatives, he says, this path does not involve locating stillness, the quiet to calm ourselves and listen. Rather, it takes place as more of an explosion, as we find our creative center in voices of inspiration and excitement about possibilities. He writes, "It's the unexpected and the accidental that wake up our inner realm, so we must stay wide open, willing to be unexpectedly knocked off our center." The art therapist Amy Miracle, whose work has inspired my dives into slow drawing and paper cutting, agrees. As artists, she says, we need to stay fully present and open to the what-ifs. On the screen, you'll see my Creativity Matters project for this month, Flotsam. It's an intuitive mixed media collage that began with only this prompt. Explore the path of finding your center using your favorite modality. That was it, well, except for my commitment to following the what-ifs. Inspired by the fragmentation approach of textile artist Shelley Rhodes, I started by cutting pieces out of 3 different fabrics. I manipulated them by pulling threads out and braiding and attaching pieces and threads back together, following what felt right. Building up the core piece with more threads and buttons and fragments of recycled trim, I continued following the what-ifs, intuitively layering collage fodder created from recycled papers and slow drawings. Their color palette and their patterns began to remind me of Flotsam, and then I had a vision to guide my way forward. Continuing layering outward, I built up spiraling momentum with textured paper-cut shapes, incorporated more tangled strands of thrifted trim and torn threads and fragments of vintage sari silk. Underneath, I layered honeycomb packing paper cut to suggest the movement of water, as well as torn sections of delicate mulberry paper and fragments of an upcycled scarf. To finish, I changed the direction of my layers, returning inward to the initial paper cut pieces, filling out their circular sweep of motion with beach stones, driftwood, beads, and bark. Well, this process of intuitively creating flotsam felt to me a lot like walking a labyrinth, which is slightly ironic because that was one of the prompts I hadn't chosen for the month. But just as Reverend Scott Taylor asserted, my creative sojourn had actually operated in reverse of a labyrinth. It spiraled outward before I returned to the center, doing my best each step of the way to remain fully present. Creativity Matters has also caused me to rethink the purpose and practice of creativity and ask what it means to live a creative life and who is an artist. I'm going to give you a hint here. We all are. Creativity is a human inheritance we all share. It's a hallmark of our species. In Big Magic, Creative Living Beyond Fear, the writer Elizabeth Gilbert says, "If you are alive, you are a creative person. You and I and everyone that you know are descended from tens of thousands of years of makers. Decorators, tinkerers, storytellers, dancers, explorers, fiddlers, drummers, builders, growers, problem solvers, and embellishers. These are our common ancestors." I'll say it again. We are all creatives. And as Betsy said this morning, every one of us has something to say. That's a core value I hold so strongly, I would place it right alongside our first principle, inherent worth and dignity and creativity. So yes, binocular vision disorder knocked me off my center, but I can now joyfully report that my participation in Creativity Matters has nurtured a daily art practice. It pushed me to finally set up my own dedicated studio space. It connected me with others on their own journeys of discovery, and it reawakened my creative spirit to the what-ifs. Like my Flotsam project, I am now spiraling outward in an energizing and creative explosion of possibilities, even as I continue to walk the spiral inward, reconnecting to and healing my wounded core. Thank you.
I'll now invite Tom Darton to come forward to offer his reflection. Thank you, Tom.
Good morning. My name is Tom Darnton. I serve this congregation as a member of the Board of Trustees. Reverend Alex called me on Tuesday, asked if I could prepare some remarks for the service. I knew that if Alex was calling on Tuesday for the coming Sunday, he was in need of help. Stepping into that need is part of being in covenant. I didn't know I was getting this cleanup spot, but next time I would love to have just taken notes because I could weave something together from the other three, as you're about to see. Anyway, my writing process begins with a dive into saved work, mine and others. Reviewing that material, I realized that I had already used my favorite UU stories during previous visits to this pulpit, so I had to dig a little deeper. As I wallowed in those saved files, a simple message began to emerge. What I've come to think of as my center is where I find my core values. The opposite is also true. My core values do not exist as a list, either in my brain or on my computer. They are the medium in which I make good choices about how to live my life. One way I know I am centered is when I find myself making choices based on my core values. It's more like an emotional experience than a rational one. But how could I make this deeply personal experience more accessible to those of you here this morning? I kept wallowing and stumbled across an email I wrote almost exactly 15 years ago, January 22nd, 2008. I was writing on a Tuesday about an experience I had had attending church the previous weekend, which was Martin Luther King weekend of 2008. I wrote at the time that it was an important experience that I would never forget. I had totally forgotten it. I also said at the time that it would be a pivotal moment in my life. In retrospect, that has proven true. Let me set the stage. In January of 2008, I was a bit over 10 years into recovery following a 30-year relationship with a person suffering from alcoholism. My recovery began at a memorial service at the UU Church in Ann Arbor in July of 1977. At the time, I hadn't been to a UU service in 30 years. The service memorialized the wife of a professional colleague, the first loss to breast cancer in my social network. Something about that 1977 memorial service triggered a long, dormant engagement with my core values. What emerged without me realizing it at the time was completion of step 1 of the 12 steps of recovery. I realized that evening that I was powerless and my life was out of my control. I had lost touch with my core values. By 2008, I was well into recovery and still 4 years away from my cancer adventure, which was my next big test. A couple of months after I wrote the message I'm about to read, I was nominated to serve as a trustee of the congregation where my recovery began. This began a 15-year period of serving on church boards, which will end this coming June. The congregation was then in the midst of a 3-year search for a new minister, following an 80-year period during which the congregation had been led by just 3 senior ministers. I was writing to David Keyes, who was our interim minister at the time. Towards the end of the message, I make reference to, quote, Glenn's music, unquote. The Glenn referenced is Glenn Thomas Rideout, who was our part-time music director at the time and a grad student at the University of Michigan School of Music. Many of us became familiar with his work during our months of online services. The high point of my service on that UUA board came a few years later when we rearranged our budget in order to create a full-time music director position that launched him on his career as a spiritual leader in UUA. So here's the message that I wrote back in 2008. David, your sermon on Sunday helped me to an important experience. Since my early years growing up in the Flint, Michigan Unitarian Church, I have often reflected about my sense of self, which in those early days I called the life force within me. One of my favorite poems was Invictus by W.E. Henley, which concludes, quote, "I am the master of my fate, I am the captain of my soul," unquote. My sense of self as something of which I was the sole proprietor served me well during the months in the mid-1970s when I was engaged in seeking and ultimately obtaining a discharge from the United States Army Reserve Officer Corps as a conscientious objector. Buffy St. Marie's Universal Soldier was the bridge between Invictus and being a CO. It wasn't until the late 90s when I was attending weekly Al-Anon meetings after my first marriage collapsed that I came to accept as an intellectual construct that a belief in a higher power could be useful as a survival tactic. As I listened to your sermon and your references to, I believe, Reverend Wyeth's theology, I recognized his understanding of God as the one I heard often in pulpits around the Midwest Unitarian churches I visited in the high school youth program. Your explanation of Martin Luther King's moment of doubt and his experience of connection with his God at that moment brought me to a place of experiencing, not understanding, but experiencing, that the life force which I have thought of as mine all these years is God, the part of me that is connected with that which is beyond me and connects me to the universe. This has triggered a number of new perspectives which I am pursuing as time and focus permit. I'm sure that in the decades to come, I will remember that Sunday experience as a pivotal time in my life. It was set up by Glenn's music and the buzz I carried through the weekend and into the service itself. However, it was your sermon which lit the path for me. And I concluded, I guess that's the way it's supposed to work, right? I did get a nice reply from Reverend Keys. That 2008 message references several episodes in my life where the core values I absorbed growing up Unitarian served me well and prepared me for the multiple challenges that were awaiting for me in 2012. For me, finding my center is something which has to happen over and over. It's a process, not a destination. It more closely resembles an emotional experience rather than an intellectual one. And for me, it often happens when singing in church. There's something about standing up and singing together that pushes all the distractions aside, brings me to that place where my core values can be brought to bear on the tasks at hand. We are about to sing about the fire of commitment. I'll be singing my way to being centered and in sync with my core values, and I invite you to take the same journey.
Well, that was a nice intro to say, please rise in body or in spirit. Thank you so much, Tom. And let us sing together the fire of commitment, and your teal hymnals are also up here on the screen.
When the fire
before we extinguish the chalice, I sort of feel like we need a breath. Wow. What beautiful sharing. What a journey we all share. We extinguish the chalice, but not the warmth and light of the flame. That will stay with us during this week and on as we continue to live into our deepest values.
And so, in the spirit of covenant, community, and commitment, in the spirit of listening to our lives and holding our values close, may we be made ready to serve one another and to create the world that we so desperately dream of. Go in peace, all. May it be so, and amen. A short reminder that we have a UU orientation after our service today. So we'll have a little bit of a break for you to stretch your legs and grab a cup of coffee and maybe a treat or so. And then join us back here in about maybe 10, or we don't have any treats, I'm getting frantic. Okay, no treats today. False advertising. We do have coffee though. Oh, no coffee either. Well, this is why it's really important when we're a community that's able to come together to support the good things we do. So we don't have coffee, but we'll invite you to, just enjoy a time of fellowship anyway. This is it, folks. It takes a community, right? Well, anyway, in that spirit, please join us if you're interested in a time for our UU orientation following the service. Go in peace, all. May it be so, and amen.